Hello, welcome to this week's free coaching call. I am going to be talking today all about how you can kind of start setting up author events. So if you've never done this before, I think you'll find this very helpful. And even if you have done it before, you may pick up a thing or two. So I'm just going to get the comments set up and make sure that we are working, and then we'll dive into it. I have a couple of things to go through with you guys today. And the other thing as well is that if you guys are in my launch course, we're also going to be talking a bit about this later today in that call because we got some questions around it. So this is just a great, it could be a follow-up to that, or it can be, like a bit of a preview into that call as well. So if you're watching this, feel free to get the tips out of this as well. Okay, so here's what I want to start off by kind of diving into. And so, first of all, you don't have to do author events, but I do recommend it because it's one of the great things that can really help to build your credibility. It can also really help to get your book out there and seen and heard and known. And it also gives you the opportunity to sell books in a different way. So there's a lot of benefits to hosting author events, and there's a lot of different types of author events you can do. Today we're going to talk more about the physical ones, the ones that you do in person, but keep in mind, you can also just do your own online author events, and you can do like a virtual release day party, you can do a live reading, you can do a collaboration with another author, like a live stream type thing. There's lots of things that you can do on your own without needing to get other venues involved and kind of get the go-ahead from them. But when you do an in-person event, obviously that's going to open up a lot of doors for you. So what I first recommend when it comes to doing in-person events is, this is a tip for later on as well, but figuring out what kind of events you actually want to be doing. That being said, we're going to talk a bit about that in a minute. But just knowing right off the bat, what kind of events are you trying to secure and why can be very helpful. And especially because your brand will really sell the events for you. And so what I mean by this, and I kind of want to give you an example here, a lot of the time when someone walks into a bookstore, it's kind of two situations where they're walking in to find a new book and they don't really know what they're looking for and they're kind of just browsing, in which case they're open to suggestions and possibilities, right? But they're not going in there with the intention of buying anything. They're in there with the intention of discovering something, right? The other case is that someone walks into a bookstore and they know exactly what they're trying to find and they know exactly what book they're after. And in those cases, it's really the fact that they have that awareness of the author and of the new book release that has just come out, or that book in particular, before they even go into the bookstore, right? And so in both of these situations, there's a lot of branding that sells for you. So whether that be that the book itself has great branding and has a great blurb and is selling for, in the bookstore, when you find it and you discover it and you go, this isn't something I want to read, this doesn't look good. In that case, it's the book's branding that's selling. Otherwise, it's your brand that's selling. It's the fact that you have been out there for months ahead of time talking about the book, building product awareness around the book, building hype around the book, so that people actually go out of their way to go into the bookstore and purchase it when it's out. And that even can be they're purchasing it online, right? And so I am going to talk a little bit about bookstore sales in this video as well, because it kind of ties into the success of events. Whereas, you can do the events separately as well, but it's going to be more helpful for you if you're also selling books in the process. So it's kind of important to talk about. But really, ideally, you need to make sure that you have a strong established brand so that people know that you exist in the first place and that they're actually wanting to go to a physical bookstore and purchase copies of your book, or at least meet you as the author. Otherwise, there's not really a lot that's going to draw people into attendance unless you're doing some kind of maybe a writing workshop, or there's a panel and people are going out of curiosity and interest or desire to learn something, which again, you have to be able to speak to those pain points, and they're really not going to show up unless they know why you are a great person to come listen to, right? So you really want to have all these things in place for you, and that's what your brand can do. So the very first thing I recommend before you go setting up events in person is actually build your brand and actually make sure it's strong and it's established. And in my course, I teach this in the second phase, and I do that for a reason, because you want it to be solidified by the third phase of your launch, right? It's going to take you some time to build this up, and it takes a combination of your book and having product awareness around that, as well as having credibility around yourself. You kind of need to spend time to really demonstrate that you are someone who knows what they're doing, that you are a professional author who does this for a living, even if it is your first book, like really leading with that example and making sure that you have demonstrated to people, like, this is what I write, this is why I write this thing, this is why I'm good at it, this is why I know what I'm doing. Like really niching down into the thing that you like to write, even if again that is multiple genres and multiple things, just really owning each one and being able to showcase why you are the next go-to author for that thing, because that's going to help to establish you in the market and set you apart from other people, right? So that's first of all really important, something that you want to do. Okay, so once you've done that, now take this with a grain of salt, right? Like you can do this however you want. It really depends on the opportunities being presented to you and what's going to work best for your book. And keep in mind that every book is different as well. So you want to really think about what's best for your book here. But the easiest way to start doing events that I usually suggest is starting local and then working your way out. Now, I would suggest going against this advice if your book is set in a specific location and it makes sense to do an event there first because it would be an easy way in, for example, or maybe it's just another opportunity that's come by that just makes more sense, like maybe you have a connection and it's just going to be an easy way to get started. Whatever works for you, go do that. But if you don't have any connections, if you have nothing to really start with, then start with your local bookstore and go in with the angle of I'm a local author and I have this book, and really just sell it from that angle. Now, I've also noticed this works a lot better if you come from a smaller town because like you're less likely to have local authors in a smaller town. But that being said, it doesn't mean it can't work. Now, the other thing you want to keep in mind with this is that you always want to make sure that your events kind of have a newsworthy angle, because the easiest way to kind of secure events is to make sure that the bookstore is getting something out of it, or the venue in general is getting something out of it, right? So if you were going to do a signing, obviously you'd want them to feel confident that the books are going to sell and that if they stock the books, it's not going to be a waste of their money. You want them to feel confident that people are going to show up on the day, right? So a really great way to make sure that you can ease these concerns is also to work with them to promote the event. And so if you can pair it with a press release, again, this works really well when you're a local author because you can use that angle in the press release and say that you are a local author, that you're about to have a book come out, that you're going to have an event happening at a local bookstore that is newsworthy for people in the local area. And so that makes sense to send out a press release about, right? And the thing about a press release or whatever promotion you end up doing is that it has to be newsworthy in some way. It has to be something that's worth putting out there to the public, that's going to add value to the public, right? And so if you are just saying, well, I have a book coming out, so does everyone and their dog who does writing for a living, like that's their job. You would hope they have books coming out all the time. It's not enough of a selling point to really like get like news coverage around, unless you yourself happen to be very famous, very popular, very newsworthy yourself, which is not often the case, right? And so you want to make sure you have that angle. So if you're struggling to find an angle, that local author is always a great way to start, and it's a great way to get started with events. And it also means you don't have to travel that much because you are in the area. But then, you can also find angles around your book's content and themes. You can find angles around what's going on around you at the time. So I've gotten front page news a number of times. First time I played the local author angle. There was another time that we ended up playing the angle of my book became a bestseller overnight. This was like, we found this out last minute. So I'd already started working with the newspaper at this point to get this story going. And the news came in really last minute. Oh, it's actually a bestseller. It's hit #1 on Amazon. And so I sent them these stats and I said, this is what happened. And they ended up putting a story out that like my debut into my fantasy series was a bestseller overnight. So they used that angle to make it newsworthy. There was another time that COVID impacted a lot of things. And so I was meant to be going on a book tour and that didn't happen. And then we ended up taking some of the events online, which wasn't as good as the book tour, but it was what we were able to do at the time. And I ended up telling the newspaper about how COVID had impacted my events and this is what we did to solve it. And they found that very interesting because they were like, how do you take the events online? So they ran a story about that. And so there's a couple of ways that you can kind of just use what's going on around you or what's happening with the book or things about the book specifically or things about you specifically that can help you to make a story and build it out for the newspaper or whoever you're pitching. Like this can work for radios and TV and all sorts of things, right? So that's really important, is like, if you're going to do events, tie it with something, because it helps to give it a reason to run and to reach the public, and then it gives it something that the public can do. You know, like, it's like they read about you, they kind of learn about you, they think you're really interesting, and then they want to go see you for themselves. They want to go meet you, they want to go buy your book, right? So that's kind of the whole tie in there that works really well. So that is my suggestion. Like, if you're really new to it, that is the best way to get started, unless you have another opportunity knocking at your door, in which case, you know, trust your gut and run with that. And then you can work your way out. From there, you can kind of use that leverage and that early publicity and that early success around your book sales to then go to more towns that make sense for you and really show them and tell them what you've done before and demonstrate the bookstores you've been to before, and really build up those connections and kind of create new opportunities to also do events, right? Now, like I said, it's really important that, like, look, it doesn't matter if it's your first event and maybe only a couple of people show up. That's happened to me a couple of times. Or if you know, maybe you're doing a signing and maybe only a couple of people come by. That's okay. Don't think that it was a failure. Like, you know, it takes time to build up events sometimes. But that being said, if you are going to branch outside of your local area, I probably wouldn't recommend doing that until you have a bit more going on for you, a bit more traction. Because if you do happen to get stocked in a bookstore and your books don't sell, you're going to run into issues later down the track where they may send the books back to you and then slap a bill on top of that for the inconvenience of having to send the books back to you, or they might just burn them. Like, they do a couple of different things depending on the store and what their protocol is for books that aren't selling, but it's going to be an inconvenience for both of you, and it's not going to be very good for your working relationship if your books aren't selling. And that's, again, as a result of you as a brand not having that big enough presence in that selling point within your brand online to make people want to pick up copies of your book. So you want to make sure that it's always there and that you're always working to grow that and improve that as you start to branch out with events. So it's okay to just stick to your local area for some time if you feel like that's the only thing that's working for you right now. Like, that is totally fine, and you can still use that, you know, to showcase that you are doing this author thing for real and you are going to events and you are doing those things, and there's nothing wrong with doing it locally for a little while. And you still have, you know, the footage and the photos to demonstrate from a marketing angle that you're also still doing events. And you can also just have, you know, you can be asking people, like, if I were to go elsewhere, where would you love to see an event done? And then you can really use the public's feedback to figure out where might it be best to go do an event next that will actually sell and make sense, right? So just keep those things in mind. Let's see. So here's another thing that kind of ties into that, is the whole putting yourself out there and networking thing. So something that I did very early on when this was before I did events at all, but I just knew it was something I always wanted to do. I really went out of my way to go to festivals and functions around writing and make connections in the early days. And I literally would travel interstate to do this because like, being from a regional area, like, there's not a lot of events around here. So like, it was kind of like I had to do it, but I also was willing to do it, right? I was willing to take time off of work and get on a plane and go stay somewhere and go to this event and introduce myself to people and give them a business card and tell them that I was an up and coming author and that my book was set to release in this year and that I wanted to kind of build connections. And I did this, and I like introduced to book bloggers and people who were running the events, and, you know, just like trying to make connections, trying to let them know that, like, hey, I would be interested in doing events in the future if it was a good fit. Here's what I could see myself contributing or offering. I applied to a lot of places as well. So just going out there to make those in-person connections can be really helpful. I highly recommend doing it if you have the availability to do it. It's just helpful to have those things. And this helped me. So one of my first events I ever did was I spoke at a writing festival. And I did that by, you know, going out, introducing myself. The lady who ran the writing festival invited me to lunch. And we had a business lunch and we talked about what I might present. And I said, I have like a speech that I can talk about how my first book came about. And she's like, that would be great. And so I ended up coming on last after all the other presenters, and I did like a speech that weekend. And so that was just a way that I did it. Was like, I went out, made a connection, like said, this is what I can do. And that's what we did. And so like, there's lots of opportunities there if you are willing to get out and just kind of get into cycles a little bit. I do recommend doing that. Not every connection you make, like something's not going to come out of all of them. Like some of them were just like cool and like never heard from them again, even though I did try to follow up a few times, and that's fine. Like the aligned connections and opportunities will come through. And something that I've been really good at doing over the years is making sure that I just always have my eyes open for different opportunities. If I see someone who needs a speaker for their podcast or their online event that they're doing, I will like say I'm available if I am, obviously, but like I will say, yeah, I'd be willing to do that and make connections that way. And just like being willing to help people where I can see they need help. And then usually that helps me at some point when I need to publicize something, right? And so it's kind of like this give and take relationship. And I'm just always on the lookout for who is a good connection I can make with, like, even if I'm seeing it in Facebook groups, you know? So just looking for that kind of thing as well and keeping your eyes open can be a really big tip. And it's something you can start doing now, even if your book isn't quite ready to be published yet, if you're still working on it. And like, I mean, I even had people say, like when I was on podcasts, for example, I even had them say, well, when your book comes out, we'd love to have you on again. And, you know, we can talk about it now that it's out. And like, that would be great. Like, here's when it comes out. Feel free to contact me again. So there's just even things like that that can happen. So the final thing I want to go over are the types of events that you can do. And I tend to do a lot of them. Like, I'm pretty open to anything. I have done book signings. I have done, I've done speaking at writing festivals. Haven't done a panel yet, but I hope to do that at some point. But the most regular thing I do is a writing workshop. Now, I specifically really focused on landing writing workshops for myself because I wanted to do them. Like, before I even was published, I knew it was something I wanted to do. I felt really deeply for myself that I wanted to do writing workshops and travel around and do these things because I grew up in a regional area. So we didn't have a lot of authors coming through all the time to do that kind of thing for me, right? Or for our area. But like specifically as an author, as an aspiring writer at the time, who was really trying to learn and wanted to meet authors and wanted to ask them questions, I didn't get a lot of those opportunities. And coming from a low-income household, it wasn't like I could just go travel and go to events at that point in time. So it was very difficult for me to kind of grow those opportunities for myself. So I felt deeply in my heart that I wanted to make myself available for people who maybe were going through the same thing. And that was just like a personal thing for me. But I was like, okay, I want to do these writing workshops. So I really looked at how do I do writing workshops from the beginning. And I built out frameworks and I built out presentations and I had things on hand that I could run with if I got the opportunity to do one. And what I ended up doing over time is developing a framework for teaching writing that is specifically mine, like no one else teaches it the way that I do. It is my specific and unique approach to writing books. And it's now like something that I can like teach for myself and like no one else can teach it the way that I do. So when I do these writing workshops, it's very unique in a sense that I have my own delivery style and thing that I am teaching people. And that being said, I also work directly with teachers, with contacts that I have to adapt the teaching so that it's fit for their level, so that it's fit for where they are at, and really they're going to get the most out of it in an engaging way. So that is really what I was aiming to do for a while, because most of the workshops I present are at schools. It doesn't mean that I don't do them at libraries. I have 2 that I'm going to do at libraries in June of this year, which is 2 months from this training. So, you know, like that does come by and then I'm able to teach it in a bit more depth. But you know, these opportunities are really focused on the schools because that's where I want to be teaching the workshops. So it made sense for me to do workshops because I had a strong why behind it, but also because I actually thought about being a teacher at some point before I went on to do all of this. I was in my, you know, year outside of high school, the gap year. I was thinking about what do I want to do. And I considered being a teacher and I really thought I'd be good at it, and a lot of people thought I'd be good at it too. And I remember having a conversation with a teacher on the phone and just asking them, what are the work hours like what is the commitment level like? Is it something I could do while writing books, do you think? And they were like, no, I don't think you'd be able to do 2 at once. So that's why I didn't go down that path. But what I had discovered through coaching is that there are some aspects of coaching that are similar to teaching. So I do enjoy coaching for that reason because it's got a similar aspect to it. It's more of a mentoring thing, but I'm good at it for that reason. And so it was a really obvious tie-in that then the workshops would also make sense for me because I happen to really enjoy teaching and I happen to be good at it, right? So like maybe that's not the case for you. If you find that teaching writing stresses you out, or you just don't enjoy teaching at all, don't do writing workshops. Like you can do, like let's say you're really good at just talking about topics, like you could do a panel. Maybe you're really opinionated, right? Or maybe you are really good at presenting speeches and you have a really interesting story behind how you became an author. You can talk about that, you know, you can give speeches on it. So there's lots of things you can do that are not just writing workshops. And even like if it's a book signing, there's nothing wrong with that either. Maybe you just are someone who likes the opportunity to get your books out there, and you like connecting with readers, and you can be very social, you know, maybe not all of the time, but maybe you can make yourself social for an hour or so, and that just works for you. Like there's some things there that you can consider. So on the topic of deciding what workshops are best for you, I'd really look at your strengths, and I'd really look at, okay, well, what am I going to want to show up for and make connections for and put myself out there to do? Because if you are not behind it, if you're not like, oh, you know, I'll take events when they come to me, but I'm not like willing to get up and really try to get events for myself, you're not going to get events. Like you have to really be willing to show up and introduce yourself to people. A lot of the time, I don't land events until I email a library and say, do you want any authors to come speak this year? I'm available, let me know what I can do. Like I will do that, because otherwise I don't hear from people, right? So like you have to put yourself out there. And so make sure it's something that you're willing to show up for and you really want to put yourself out there for. Okay, that is basically all of the things I wanted to go through. So I just want to check the comments and make sure we didn't have any questions. And we don't, so that is good. So if you're watching the replay, let me know if this was helpful. Let me know if you do have any questions. And that's really what I would suggest. If you are new to doing events and you're like looking to kind of start it up, those are my startup tips that I hope will help you, and really follow that and see what comes out of it. So that's all, and I will chat to you next week for our next coaching call. Okay.